Hi, and welcome back to Focal Point, AFR Talk, this special Tuesday edition of Focal Point. Our special guest is Dr. Terry Mortenson, who has a Ph.D. in the history of geology from the University of Coventry in England, also an MDiv from Trinity Evangelical Divinity School in Chicago, so is qualified to speak both to issues that have to do with the age of the earth from a scientific standpoint as well as from a biblical standpoint. We promised you that if you had questions about the age of the earth, we would pass them along to Dr. Mortenson. He would answer them for you. So let's open up our phone lines, 888-589-8840. Let's go right to Brian in Grants Pass, Oregon. Brian, you're on Focal Point with Brian Fisher and Dr. Terry Mortenson. What's on your mind?
Hey, first off, I want to thank you guys for the show. It's pretty interesting.
Great, thank you.
Second, for the first thing I want to talk to you about was carbon-14. You guys made the premise that the Earth should be out of it by now. And I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but carbon-14 is created on a daily basis. When photons from the sun come in the atmosphere, they interact with nitrogen, and one of the byproducts is carbon-14. I work on some weather equipment that actually uses carbon-14 as a source, so we know actually how it's made. And it's not going to run out. It's made every day.
All right. Terry, response to that?
Yeah, we know that, and that's the only comment that I made was that if the whole Earth was made of carbon-14 atoms, it would decay in a million years. So the half-life, it decays rapidly, and it's not. If you find carbon-14 in coal or oil or fossils that are supposedly millions of years old, they can't be that old because carbon-14 decays so rapidly. That's the point that we're making.
Now, Brian, when you talk about this carbon-14 being created, where is it created? Where is it found?
Actually, in the atmosphere. It's actually in our atmosphere, up in the air.
Well, that would be the issue then. If you've got carbon-14, this is Terry's point. If you've got carbon-14 in coal or in diamonds, something that's buried deep in the bowels of the earth, I mean, that isn't getting brand new carbon-14 that's suddenly been created.
Yeah, carbon-14 is usually only used for carbon dating things up to 50,000 years.
Right.
Right.
Reliable past that.
Yeah.
Right.
My second question was you were talking about where comets come from. I wanted to let you guys know that we have a place called the Kuiper Belt that we have observed where things can come from. So, and the way they get knocked out is gravitational, being perturbed by gravitational forces. Like, for instance, Pluto is not a planet anymore because it's actually out in the Kuiper Belt. It hasn't cleared its area out yet of all the little things that are around it.
Now, so Brian, just to be clear, you're talking about this belt where comets could come from.
Yes, where they could come
have
from.
Comets
actually,
have
most of them in the Kuiper Belt. Most of the comets that we see, long-term comets, and even some of the short-term, actually go into the Kuiper Belt and come back in. So they're constantly traveling that long distance. So it's easily possible they could come from there, since after they're done with the sun, they go back out there, slow down and then come back towards the sun again.
But I guess possible, I mean, it's possible it could come from this Oort cloud outside Pluto. I mean, I think possible is different than observed.
Yeah, I think the Oort cloud's actually quite a bit farther out than the Kuiper Belt. So
Terry, any response?
The Oort cloud is farther out than the Kuiper Belt. The problem that creationists who have studied this issue, and I'm not an astrophysicist, obviously, but they would argue that the objects in the Kuiper Belt are not the right size, and it's a hypothesis. It's not proven. So a scientific hypothesis can be presented, but it's different from saying that's a proven mechanism.
All right. Well, listen, Brian, thank you. Those are both very perceptive questions. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. Let's go to Philip in Belton, Texas. Philip, you're on Focal Point with Brian Fisher. What's on your mind?
Yeah. Hello, Brian and Terry. I had, after you've been in the Christian world for so long, the question arises that aren't there two stories going on at the same time? So let me make these statements and see if you follow me. God created for 6 days. A day is like 1,000 years to God. Jesus will set up his millennial kingdom for 1,000 years. God rested on the seventh day. We know the earth to be about 6,000 years old.
Okay, and I'm a little unclear, Philip, what your bottom line is on that.
I'm just saying that there's I believe that in the 6 literal creation days.
Okay.
And I believe also that we are in the 6th millennial creation.
Oh, I see. So you're saying that each one of those days kind of is a symbol for a period of 1,000 years, or stands for a period of 1,000 years in the Earth's history, in human history.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, listen, I appreciate that. Thank you, Philip. Now, Terry, anything you want to add to that or respond to that?
This was a popular idea early in church history. Many leading Christian scholars viewed exactly that idea. They viewed the days of creation as literal, but also because of that statement in 2 Peter that a day is as 1,000 years, that Earth history would be six segments of 1,000 years and then a 1,000-year reign of Christ. I think we need to be a little bit careful of that, because in 2 Peter 3, verse 8, where it says a day is as 1,000 years, the rest of the verse says, and 1,000 years is as a day to the Lord. So it's not telling us the length. If we read the verse in context, which is the way we should always be reading Scripture, Peter is not talking about the length of history in that chapter. He's talking about the second coming of Christ, and he says that basically that Christ's return will be on God's time and God's appointed time, not ours, and that what we think is a long time or a short time is immaterial to God, because He is outside of time and He's working on His schedule. So I think we have to be, that's an interesting suggestion, but I wouldn't want to die on a hill for that one.
Let's go to Gary in Shreveport, Louisiana. Gary, you're on Focal Point with Brian Fisher and Dr. Terry Mortenson. What's on your mind?
Hi, Brian. Hi, Terry.
Hi.
I wanted to ask a question. I talk to people about this issue all the time as far as the age of the Earth. My question is has been posed to me, is how do we know, or how can we be sure that the consistency of the decay rates or the growth rates, such as the desert or the moving away of the moon or the coral reef growth, have been consistent over time in the past? And I could hang up and listen to your
Okay, so Gary, let me just see if I understand your question, because your question has to do with radiometric dating, and the question would be, if the rates of decay are the same throughout history as they are observed today, then maybe you could say that the universe is as old as they're arguing, but that assumes that the rates of decay have been constant. Is that kind of the direction?
Kind of, not just the radiometric dating, but things such as the growth of deserts and the growth of the coral reef and the moving away of the moon. How can we be sure those things have been consistent in the past?
All right. Okay. That's a good question, because there and Terry, I guess there are certain assumptions that are made by evolutionists about rates of decay and rates of growth and those kinds of things.
Right, and the assumption in modern science is described by one word that became popularized in the early 19th century, uniformitarianism, which says that the rates of processes of change have been essentially constant throughout history. But there's no way that any scientist can prove that. That's an assumption about the unobserved past. And in the case of sediments and radiometric decay, we believe the flood well, certainly with respect to sediments, the flood would have a very significant influence on that. Also, the fall, the judgment of God on the whole creation in Genesis 3. We don't know exactly how that affected the creation, but we would think that mutations started to develop, and as a part of God's curse. Romans 8 says that the whole creation is groaning in bondage to corruption, waiting to be liberated at the second coming of Christ. So the world is not the way it was at the very beginning. It's under God's curse. It still bears the marks of His creative handiwork, but it also bears the marks of death and decay and disease. And so no scientific dating method can be absolutely trustworthy, because all the methods are based on assumptions about the unobserved past.
Let's go to Joey. Last question of the segment. Joey, Lake Charles, Louisiana. You're on Focal Point with Brian Fisher and Terry Mortenson. What's on your mind?
Oh, not too much. I appreciate the chance to speak. Actually, I got two comments. One of them, the easiest one I can remember whenever I'm talking to somebody about the age of the Earth or evolution, is the population numbers kind of diffuse the situation. The amount of people we have on the Earth, if we look at the growth rate, and the growth rate would be the same throughout hundreds of millions of years, we would have a whole lot more people on the face of the Earth than what we do now.
Okay, Joy, let me interject right there because we're running out of time, and I want to give Terry an opportunity to respond to that one. Joey's made an observation about if humans have been on Earth as long as evolutionists say they have been, there ought to be a lot more people alive today, and there ought to be a lot more people that have died. Where are all the dead bodies?
That's well put. We should have a much larger population, and we should have millions of fossils of humans in the rocks of the Earth.
And the fact is, as I understand it, Terry, these fossilized remains of Neanderthals or whatever they want to call them are very rare. But if Homo sapiens has been around for a couple 100,000 years, like evolutionists say, then that would be like 8 billion people that lived and died. So where are all their skeletal remains?
Billion. And in fact, if you start with 8 people after the flood, you can get the population of the Earth today, taking into account, wars and disease, the growth rate. The size of the population of the Earth is consistent with the biblical history and time frame, not with the evolutionary time frame.
Our guest has been Dr. Terry Mortenson. He is a lecturer and researcher with Answers in Genesis, which is a great resource for apologetics that have to do with the origins and biblical authority. I encourage you to go to their website. That's answersingenesis.org, answersingenesis.org. Terry, thank you for taking the extra time to be with us today. Very, very informative. Appreciate it very much. Thank you, my friend.
Okay, Brian.
Dr. Terry Mortenson, Answers in Genesis. We'll be right back with more Focal Point AFR Talk. Don't go anywhere.